Well, as we embark in our first formational habit, abiding alone with God, today's bottom line is this: consecrating time and space is the first step to living in God's purpose.
Yeah, and finding that time and space is hard to do in our culture today. It's true for everyone. I think it's especially true for young people today. They live very busy lives and have lots of distractions. And I have this memory of sitting down with a group of students, and most of them were middle school age, and I was talking to them about just life, and they mentioned that they had trouble falling asleep at night, and so we were talking about why that might be, and come to find out, they had almost no downtime in their day. Like, I asked them, how often are you just bored and you don't have anything to do? And they said, like, almost none. None of them had any time. One of them mentioned, I think I've got probably 2 minutes a day. I'm like, 2 minutes a day? I was like, well, no wonder that your mind is a little busy when when your head hits the pillow at night, But it just grieved me because I thought, I've been hearing about all this anxiety and depression and things that are plaguing our young people and really everyone in our culture. And I'm thinking, wow, not only do you not have time with God, like, you don't have downtime. You don't have
Right.
You don't have time and space for you, much less for God. It's like, no wonder we're in trouble.
Sure, and these cultural things are pervasive. Even just a sense of just a lack of peace, seemingly an aimlessness a lot of times, or there's that term FOMO, fear of missing out, right? This wondering, are we fulfilling our purpose? Are we really doing anything of value and significance? And I think that kind of adds and stokes the anxiety and some of those other things we're talking about. And so perhaps now more than ever before, it's time for us to recover this practice that really Jesus modeled for us. And in this week's teaching, we really delve deeply into how Jesus practiced consecrating time and space to be alone with the Father. But for this group session, it's worth noting that all throughout the biblical narrative, people who had a depth in their relationship with the Father, who really were anchored to their purpose on this earth as it applied to what God was calling them to do and reaching their fullest potential. And there's this commonality that they would consecrate time and space to connect with God.
Yes, and the guy that we're looking at in this group session today is no exception to that rule. Daniel, incredibly, was this guy who'd been dragged out of his homeland, as a prisoner basically, and God, blessed him, and he rose to a position of authority and power, but he was still a stranger in a strange land, that did not worship God. And this story inspires me because just to see that he's willing to lay his life on the line, to stake his life on his faith in God above everything else, and to stick with this habit that he had formed of praying 3 times a day, of carving out that time and space in such a way that people around him noticed that he did that, and was unwilling to compromise on that. I keep thinking that if it had been me, I might have not, just like, hey, I'm taking a break. Taking a break for a month.
Man, the path of least resistance would have totally been to lay low, to try to compromise on this time. He would have seemingly been able to justify away, this kneeling or being before his window 3 times a day in prayer. But in reality, what we see is that Daniel was extremely disciplined and specific in when he would practice this, where he would practice this, and how often. So the time and space were consecrated, for this purpose in the face of great adversity.
Yeah. So our thought is that if Jesus found it that important,
Sure.
and all these giants of faith through Scripture like Daniel thought it was so important, then shouldn't we think it's just as important and as critical for our lives, for our faith, to be very intentional about the time that we carve out for God, the space that we give to that time with the Lord. And so we want you to spend some time in groups today just talking about, what are the obstacles you face in carving out time with God? What would it look like for you to have a space that was dedicated, consecrated for that time with God?
Sure. And it's worth noting, maybe challenging to us and inspiring, that Jesus consecrated time and space, and he was a very had a lot of demands upon him. The times that we see that he is so intentional in this are times when there's a lot of people vying for his attention, vying for his time.
Yeah.
So he was not unaware of how difficult this was.
Right.
Obviously, with Daniel, we see there's a law passed
Sure.
preventing him, or trying to prevent him from this practice. And so it's worth acknowledging our modern obstacles, the difficulties, but also acknowledging there's a way to move through those, to move beyond those, to consecrate time and space.
So this is something that we've been practicing
Sure.
in our own lives imperfectly. I've had better seasons than others with this, but it's something I've really been trying to work on. I know you have too, so maybe we could just briefly share a little bit of like, what does that look like for us?
Right. So morning time is the time that I consecrate for this practice. And I know there's people that maybe are watching and say, I'm not a morning person. And the reality is this is where there's room for everyone to shape this within your particular context, your season of life, what makes sense for you. However, I think it's worth noting that beginning the day with this time and space, man, and truthfully, I by nature am not a morning person.
Me neither.
But
it's a game changer.
Oh man, like devoting to this practice has been a game changer, and having setting the day, framing the day with this time with the Lord is something now that I would grieve missing, and do grieve if I miss it.
Yeah, there was a long time that I if you had told myself like 10, 15 years ago that what I would be doing now, I wouldn't have believed you probably. But part of that is owed to small children training me to get up earlier than I ever got up before. But I so value that time now. And so my time is also in the morning. Not that I don't stop at other times in my day and try to remember the Lord, but that beginning point is huge for me. And so I try to get up before anyone else in my house gets up, especially kids, because they invade that space pretty quickly, and I want that time with them too. So I try to get up and have that quiet moment. It's usually in my living room. It's a peaceful time. It's quiet. I've got a chair that I sit in. I've got my place where I put my cup of coffee.
Same here.
Cup of coffee, and it's just become this precious time to me that in the seasons where I fall off the wagon, I actually find myself like missing it.
Sure. And noticing a difference. I think some of that anxiety and some of those things, that lack of peace, that being more driven by the things that seem urgent, that aren't really leading to our greater purposes in life, man, all of that can creep back so quickly. And that consecrated time is an ingredient that really is a game changer for all of those things.
Keeps you locked into God's purpose for your life. And so we want to challenge you, talk a little bit with your groups and dive into what this could look like for you.
And hey, just one other thought as you're doing this and kind of getting specific still around when are you going to do this? Where are you going to do this? How often or how much time are you going to consecrate? A lot of times we want to measure the priority of something in quantity. But I love the idea that quantity is not always the appropriate measure for what designates something as higher priority in our lives as much as consistency. It's that this is non-negotiable. When that time, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or an hour block of time, it's not about the amount of time as much as this is non-negotiable in my life. This is something that I fight for to have this time. And that's what we see in the lives of Jesus, is what we see today in Daniel, and it's hopefully what we'll begin to see in ourselves.